Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Allow me to switch to French because right now we have other participants outside of the US who are also watching and listening. You have the English version, so I will switch now to French. Messieurs, Mesdames, bonjour. Au nom du comité d'organisation du forum, je suis ravi et honoré de vous souhaiter la bienvenue au forum sur le thème africain et la diaspora africaine, définissant collectivement les voies conduisant à la transformation de l'Afrique. Il est encourageant de noter tant d'experts représentant un large éventail de pays et zones de développement international. Mesdames et messieurs, bienvenue d'ici. Pour ceux qui vivent ici, bienvenue à l'ambassade de Côte d'Ivoire. Je voudrais souhaiter un chaleureux bon retour à ceux qui ont participé à notre dernière conférence. Nous sommes hautement reconnaissants à l'ambassade de Côte d'Ivoire et à l'ambassadeur Daouda Diabaté, actuellement à New York, pour nous avoir permis de nous réunir à nouveau ici. Comme vous le savez, l'ambassade de Côte d'Ivoire a accueilli déjà la précédente conférence. Au nom des organisateurs, nous tenons à remercier le président de la République de Côte d'Ivoire, son Excellence M. Alassane Ouattara, et le ministre Ali Koulibaly, chargé de l'intégration africaine et de la diaspora ivoirienne. Ils ont voulu ainsi exprimer leur intérêt dans nos discussions et dans ces résultats escomptés. Humblement, je suis également très honoré de vous souhaiter la bienvenue à la deuxième conférence de CADUS. Comme vous le savez, cette année, nous faisons partie du programme de CFA de la série des affaires africaines de Roland Brown, sous l'excellent leadership de Melvin Foote, président et PDG de CFA. Constituency for Africa. CADUS est également honoré de faire partie de ce programme, ainsi que MODELCI, EAP, l'Université de Boston, Oxfam America et Energy Africa. Nous pensons que le sujet est à point nommé, concret et très important pour la diaspora africaine. Depuis bien trop longtemps, nous, de la diaspora, n'avons pas fait le point de notre importance comme contributeurs pour le progrès et la richesse de notre continent. Comme une terre absente, Seigneur, nous sommes allés aveuglément sur nos vies et continuer à jouer un rôle important sur le continent. C'est un rôle que nous devons reconnaître et apprécier. En le faisant, nous devons être plus efficaces. Ce forum est un moyen d'engager un dialogue sur notre rôle en tant qu'investisseurs en Afrique et notre rôle comme un groupe collectif de la diaspora. Nous sommes une force de changement sur le continent. Nous devons suivre de près notre investissement en Afrique avec une meilleure compréhension des exigences requises et ce qu'il y a de faire. En le faisant, nous pouvons mieux nous orienter pour être mieux utiles. Nous pouvons également intervenir dans l'élaboration des meilleures stratégies, les moyens plus efficaces de l'utilisation de notre investissement. Il s'agit des transferts de fonds et en autres formes et manières d'investissement. Il s'agit des transferts de connaissances. En fait, nous parlons vraiment de création des richesses en Afrique. Cela peut être accompli à bien des égards. Des transferts d'argent vers l'Afrique au transfert de nouvelles innovations, à la construction de nouveaux hôpitaux, établissements universitaires, à l'investissement dans les domaines de l'éducation au développement humain, dans les sciences, en technologie, dans les arts, en ingénierie et en mathématiques. Au cours des discussions aujourd'hui, il deviendra évident que les transferts de fonds et de connaissances sont nombreux et variés. Il n'est pas possible d'envisager un investissement plus important que l'éducation. Nous voulons une belle journée, une discussion agréable et un dialogue franc, et aussi échanger quelques idées concrètes sur les prochaines étapes. Ce forum a été initié, co-organisé et pris en charge par MODELCI, EAP, CADUS, CFA, l'ambassade de Côte d'Ivoire, l'Université de Boston, largement représentée ici, Oxfam Amérique, Energy Africa, IDEA, et voilà un peu les groupes qui ont mis leur énergie ensemble. Nous parlons de partenariat et ce partenariat, on le veut concret. Alors, je vous dis merci d'avoir fait ce déplacement. Je voudrais sans plus tarder passer la parole à Mel Foot. Thank you very much for coming. I will now Melvin Foot.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. About the lady who just preceded me. This is a woman who has really made this whole thing possible. Jeanette Caligil, the president of MODELCI and also the co-founder of this group, CADUS, has really done 99% of all that we are here. I mean, she has made this possible, and I would like all of us to give her a hand. She's just an amazing human being. I mean, one of the more distinguished African women, and I believe that African women are really the backbone of the continent, and I believe that more and more and more needs to be done to shine a light on them. I am the president and the co-founder of a group called AHAP, which is also now a member of CADUS. And for 7 years, we've been working on STEM education for women. Here, once again, thinking that women have the sky, like the Chinese say. Women are half the sky. And we have undertaken to train women at the PhD level. A difficult thing, really, when you come to think of it. Because after all, I mean, who thinks of a woman engineer who is also has a PhD? Who thinks of that? We don't usually do that. You do, okay. You're a very rare man. He's another rare man. And who thinks of a mathematician who is also a woman? Or a physicist who is a woman? Oh, there she is, okay. Very few of us do that. But I want more and more of us to begin thinking about that. I know that Mel over here is working on STEM. So Mel and I and all of you are going to be working on STEM, and we are going to train many, many, many women to become PhDs in physics and mathematics and clearly engineering and geophysicists in the future, because that's what Africa really needs. But anyway, let me also, there's a thing that I wanted to really talk about, which is Ebola, the Ebola horror that's is affecting West Africa. I have the fortune, or the misfortune, or whatever you think of it, to be a writer also. So I write a lot, and I also write. One of the places I write for is the Huffington Post. I wrote about 2 weeks ago. I wrote a piece about Ebola and about what's going on in Africa, West Africa. So, as a member of the diaspora and as an African, I have this tendency to blame other people. We do this a lot, we Africans. whenever something happens in Africa, we always sort of point a finger at somebody else or say, well, you should have done that. They should have done that. Why didn't they do that? And so it really, in that piece, for example, I mean, I was saying to myself, why didn't the West, for example, do something about it? Why did they wait for 3 months, 6 months before they began mobilizing all the resources that are needed to manage the Ebola crisis? As a background, Ebola has been going on from 1976. The first outbreak was in 1976 in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and at that time, several hundred people died. The death was about 88% of anybody who was sick, and then that's kind of dissipated after a short time because most people who are infected died. So between 1976 until the latest outbreak, there have been 24 outbreaks. And what was done between then and now? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. We did not do a damn thing. We Africans didn't do anything at all. I mean, we live in Africa. We know Africa. And yet we did do nothing. So the point I'm trying to make is this, that we have to become more active in the affairs of our continent. We cannot expect things to be done for us and to us. We have to become more active in it. And I hope that this particular discussion that we're having today is really a call to the fact that we have to become responsible sons and daughters of Africa. And that together we really need to begin doing more and have to do more. And we have to stop blaming other people. We have to stop blaming the Chinese, stop blaming the Indians, stop blaming the Arabs, stop blaming Americans, the Europeans, because really, even though they do have a fault, and that they do, but in the end, it's our continent, and it's our home, and it's our place, and we have to do much, much, much more for it. And I'm hoping that this morning is the beginning of a dialogue towards that determination, that we will do more, and we will be better. We'll be better husbands, we'll be better mothers, we'll be better sons of Africa. Thank you.
My name is Mel Foote. I'm the president of the Constituency for Africa. And I first want to also congratulate Jeanette for bringing us together. And I think Pius has hit the nail on the head. She is really the driving force behind this. This is something that she is passionate about. And she's really passionate about making sure that the African immigrant community plays its rightful role here in the United States, And it's not about just focusing on, your village at home. It's about changing U.S. policy toward Africa, helping to be part of the fabric here of advocacy, making sure that the administration does what it needs to do with Africa. So I really applaud you, Jeanette, for your tenacity, for your focus. You're working hard, you're committed, and we see you as one of the ambassadors to the Constituency for Africa, a real ambassador, And so I applaud what you're doing, and be strong and continue what you're doing, full stop, no pullback. I also want to thank, MODELCI, I want to thank Kados, who is our other partner. I want to thank Boston University, Oxfam. Really, what we're doing, this is a historic time for Africa and the United States. And, we have been, the last 3 months have been absolutely, I've never seen it like that before. They say, be careful what you wish for, you might get it, Well, we got it, We got the U.S.-Africa Summit, which was an initiative that was introduced to the president by me, by CFA. We had recommended when he first came to the White House. They asked me, said, look, we got 2 wars going on, Afghanistan and Iraq. The housing market had collapsed. The banks had collapsed, you know. We were losing 30, 40 million jobs, you know. And here come Barack Obama, the first black president in the United States. No money in the bank. Plus, he followed the most popular president in Africa. For the most popular U.S. president who worked on Africa, and George Bush, you know. Say what you want to say about George Bush, $15 billion for PEPFAR, $5 billion for the Millennium Challenge account, trade and investment, everything that I wanted. He hired more African Americans in his administration than ever before. All the Africa jobs were held by black folks in the Bush administration. And here comes Barack Obama. You know, I want to help Africa, son of an African immigrant. You know, clearly a person who get it, but no money in the bank. And so we have recommended, you know, do a White House conference on Africa. You know, that don't cost a lot of money. You know, focus on the next generation leaders. Don't focus on Mugabe and Biya and, you know, Bashir. They're not going to change. You know, focus on those who are coming up. And that became the Young African Leaders Initiative, YALI. And so from my standpoint, you know, in August we had the White House, you know, summit. 50 African heads of state were in Washington. You know, the focus was on trade and investment. And all the questions that we had about whether the summit was going to be successful or not were erased. You know, it was the most powerful moment in the U.S. history when it relates to Africa. And so, but it took a lot of energy to do that. And as soon as that was over, Ron Brown series, Congressional Black Caucus. And so we're like in the 4th or 5th day now, and I'm already completely wiped out, you know. We had a big event yesterday with Congresswoman Karen Bass to follow up on this, and we have a whole other week ahead of us. And so then in 2 weeks from now, the World Bank meetings. You know, so there's no rest for the world. The UN General Assembly, Africa, you know. And on top of all that, we talked about the Ebola crisis, and Pius, I think you hit the nail on the head, and you know, no further discussion, but I think the biggest challenge in the history of our working on Africa is now, you know, is now. And as, you know, the World Bank has doubled its effort to $400 million, I understand, yesterday. The Obama administration has had a summit yesterday on Ebola in West Africa at the White House. So the administration is really ramping up as to what we can do. I think the African leadership, Ellen Sirleaf Johnson, President Karoma, they're ramping up as to the African side. The African Union is ramping up. Everybody's ramping up to try to figure out what it is we can do to stop this Ebola, which you know, is horrific. Everything I'm reading about it is worse and worse. You know, you're thinking that, okay, it's going to get better. It's getting worse. The numbers are going up. And so we have to do something about that. The focus of the Ron Brown series this year is promoting the STEM revolution in Africa, a diaspora priority. And, you know, we see the need to build capacity in Africa around science, technology, engineering, the arts, you know, technical. You know, we're going to push the Obama administration to train 100,000 Africans in engineering skills on the ground. We're going to push the Obama administration to support more training of doctors in Africa, you know, not bringing them here. We got technology at our disposal. We have all kinds of ways that we can be strengthening Africa underground as opposed to just dropping food out of the sky or sending over pallets. You know, the capacity for Africa is underground. I think it's also very much in the diaspora, you know. One of the things I found very unique about this organizing and Jeanette's effort is that she's bringing the technology, highly skilled, highly gifted African immigrants to the table, you know, who are doing all kinds of things in Africa, you know. They need to be heightened. They need to be strengthened. They need to be empowered. And I think this is what the mission that Jeanette has set out to do, is how do we empower you? How do we empower you? The leadership on Africa, a lot of it's in this room right now, you know. You may not know it. You're not members of Congress. You're not high in the administration. But the people who really know what needs to happen in Africa, I'm convinced, are in this room. So this is more like a caucus than it is a meeting. Nobody's talking down to you. We're talking to each other, you know. And I think that's absolutely important. This whole thing about diaspora, you know, is fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. I feel like I'm in the middle of the discussion. I'm working between the Africa Union. I'm working with the World Bank. I'm working with the administration. People are trying to figure out what the definition of diaspora is. One of the activities that we're having this week or next week is a conference call of diaspora leaders. And it's going to be a meeting of about 25 people by phone. You know, we got a teleforum set up, and we have the Australian diaspora going to be on the phone, who one of the best organized diaspora groupings is in Australia. Who would have thought, you know? But from what I see in terms, they're looking at what everybody else is doing and crafted a better strategy, you know? We have Trinidad and Tobago underlined. We got Brazil underlined. We got Canada underlined. We got the Europeans underlined. They really talk about how we work together globally as a diaspora, you know. And we think that if the call goes well, which it is, then we have a regular, you know, every other month, we will have a conference call to explore how we can do to raise the envelope. And so I envision that one day we're going to have a conference call about some of these specific kinds of things about diaspora in terms of funding, in terms of, you know, resource, how we move the resources, in terms of technical assistance, you know. And so from where I sit, I think we're on the right track. You know, I think we're on the right train. We just need to use our smart, put more resources into it, and lift up this diaspora, not just to, you know, to argue, but we want to use the diaspora to promote the science and technology, you know, needed, not just in Africa, but among African people. So, you know, it's not about just those countries in Africa. It's about where African people are at, you know, and we're global, you know, not just in Africa. We're in Jamaica. We're in Brazil. We're in Washington, D.C., you know, when you really get down to it. And then you start thinking about the human capital of diaspora. You start thinking about, you know, all the talent that we got, you know. Why aren't we able to do more with it? Is it because we're not organized, we're not structured, the strategy's not right, and some of that kind of thing. But I'm convinced that going forward is a brighter day. I'm going to now call on our guest speaker to say some remarks. His name, he's my good friend, you know, and I have a hard time calling him ambassador sometimes because he's my friend Omar. But he's now the U.S. He's now the ambassador of Benin to the United States. You know, and he was he had been in Washington for many years. I've known him. I know his wife is my good friend. She was my program officer one time at the Carnegie Corporation, and she's the one person who would be able to come in. She's really a pleasant person, but she would come to my office and say, "Mel, how are you? Everything good?" We hug. Then she'd say, "Where's that document? Where is it here? Where is that?" By the time she left, I was on the floor, you know. But we're good friends. But Ambassador has been around Washington for a long time, promoting trade and investment in Africa. And he called me from Cotonou some months ago, a year ago. He called me from Cotonou. He said, "Mel, you won't believe this." I said, "What?" "My president asked me to be the ambassador to Washington." And I fell out. I said, "What?" And so sure enough, he asked me to make some contacts for him, make sure it's okay with the State Department and so forth, which I did. But now he's the Benin ambassador to Washington. And the unique thing about him is he knows all of us. You know, he knows the good and he knows the bad. He knows what we can do and what we can't do. He knows the potential of the United States. He knows how people are organized. He knows the administration. He knows the Congress. He knows the private sector company. He knows the diaspora, you know. Which other country can say that about their ambassador, you know? Who else can say, none of the other countries, none of them, Nigeria, South Africa, none of them can say that, you know? They come here as a person who come to the United States, and they had to spend 2 years, 3 years just figuring out who we are. But in the case of Ambassador Aruna, he already knows us. So now when you go to him, you can't go to him and say anything other than, "Good morning, sir. Let's have a conversation," because he knows, you know. So without further ado, will you all rise and welcome to the podium Ambassador Omar Aruna.
That's a great presentation. I almost didn't recognize myself. So I would like to first thank, since she's the lady in the room, Mrs. Janet Ka Legil. Jeanette, I've known Jeanette almost 20 years. Probably I know Jeanette more than anybody else in this room. Long time ago when she was at the World Bank, I was at the World Bank too. So, and I'm very proud and excited to be here this morning at one of her events within the context of the Ronald H. Brown African Affairs Series. I would like also to recognize, although he's not here, my counterpart from Côte d'Ivoire, Ambassador Diabate. I saw him in New York early this week. I would like also to recognize, obviously, Mel and all the distinguished invited here this morning. And I would like to talk to you guys basically about the engagement of the African diaspora and the African in Africa. But when I talk about the African diaspora, I use the term loosely because I have a duality in me. African diaspora is not necessarily or only people that came in the U.S. by their own will. I think for me, when we talk about African diaspora, I do see also people like Mel who came way before me and not necessarily by their own will. So if I use the term diaspora, it is interchangeably. I mean, I'll use it to define a situation, to define a state of being. I would like to say something, basically, with regard to the diaspora, the African diaspora. We need to sometimes to realize that we have a self-worth. What does that mean, basically? That means that we can add economic and financial capital to home country. We can add scholastic capital to the home country. We can add visibility to the home country, and we can also bring capital, political capital to the country. Government in Africa are recognizing that. Especially my government, for that matter, recognize that. And I'm not saying that because I'm the appointee, of the government here. I'm saying that just because looking at it. Maybe in the U.S., I may be a novelty because I've been in the U.S. for the past 20-something years. And despite that, I've been appointed to be the Benin ambassador to the United States. However, there is two other Benin citizens from the diaspora, at least, who are doing the same thing I'm doing. The Benin ambassador to France is from diaspora. He's been in France almost 30 years. He was, as a matter of fact, what they call a sous-préfet in France before he'd been appointed by President Yayi as the ambassador to Benin, the ambassador of Benin to France. Same thing with the Benin ambassador to Japan. He is Mr. Zuma, who's been in Japan for the past 25 years. He's a TV personality. He's one of the renowned Japanese sinologue. So basically what I'm trying to say, I've been here 25 years. That means the government, at least the president of Benin, recognize that it is important to engage the diaspora. Who is better to advocate for you than the person who is from that environment, the person who is from that culture, the person who can understand, like Mel was saying earlier, the culture and the way of life, the approach in that society. Obviously, is the diaspora, somebody who understand who's lived there for so long. And it is very interesting that when I came back as an ambassador in Washington, D.C., I was myself surprised. Surprised not necessarily because I couldn't do the job, but surprised because of the people, the way the people embraced me. People like Mel, they embraced me. People in the community, I've known the people from the administration. But when I came back with my new, I would say my new coat, they all embraced me, which make it easy. I mean, the first day I landed back to Washington, D.C., on a Saturday. Sunday, I was on the phone. Monday, I was at the State Department or White House. So this is an add-on value to say that, okay, we have to understand and know our worth as a diaspora, basically, and know that we wanted to contribute. And we wanted to contribute to our home country, and we cannot do it by being shy about it. That is very important because what you will realize, and this I'm using also my own example, is that, yes, I've been here for the past 25 years. I have been appointed an ambassador. I have to go through a process in Benin, and it's not easy. It's not easy because you learn other things for so long. You have a new view or another view of the world. That is not necessarily different. That is not necessarily a bad thing, basically. But you all, I'm talking about people in a country and people from the diaspora, we all have the same goal, which is help develop the continent. So basically knowing that you accept that there will be a conflict, there will be jealousy, there will be skepticism, there will be all kind of situation where people will look at you as a foreigner. I mean, they have definitely a word for that in Benin, allogène. In French, allogène means that a body that is not supposed to be part of that environment. So basically, but you have to understand that and know, definitely. In my case, I knew that I wanted to serve my home country. And I also knew where are my strengths and my weakness. Only way for diaspora to really serve the home country, from my point of view, is to figure out where are your strengths. You cannot teach anything that they already know over there. You just can add the confusion to it. So look at where your strength is. My strength was trade. My strength was lobbying. So this is what I knew. I also knew that I could probably not fit perfectly if I have to go to my home country and work from there within the environment. But some people can do that. So I thought the best way to serve my country is probably serve my country within the context where I understand and I already know. So basically what I'm saying is you have to, basically the extent of the diaspora community contribution depend on the interests, the commitment of the individual, and how he wanted to give back to the country. And also, it also depends on the social economic situation of the individual. Obviously, I've been here for so long. We all have family here. You cannot just one day say, I'm moving the whole family back to my home country to help. So you have to be able to find yourself a way to be able to do that. And so it depends on your economic value. It depends on what your status is and where you want to serve. Now, it is important that we don't go as a diaspora as somebody who wanted to give a lesson to people back home, because that's the that's the much easier way to fail. Basically, you have to go and learn, be ready to learn also. I read some story where people will go and we bring things that obsolete. I always say to people, really, and that's where I'm going back to be able to serve your home country. You have to be really integrated where you are. That is important. I think my perceived success comes from the fact that the first day when I landed in the U.S., my goal was to integrate. I always say to people, I say, you cannot live in two worlds and be successful. It doesn't mean that you will forget where you came from or what your goals are. It just means that you have to anchor somewhere so you can go back and bring whatever you learn and whatever it is you have as a weight you carry here back over there. I have a funny story that I say to people. When I came here to study, I had a roommate in college. And he from another country in Africa. I'm not going to say the country, but basically he from a neighboring country in Africa. I'm from Benin. So we all would go We go to school, we work, and we come back home. First thing we wanted to do, we want to buy a TV. He went on, that was 20 years ago, 25 years ago for that matter. He went on, he bought a TV. He bought a multi-system TV, which is basically at least $500 more than a regular TV you buy here. And I'm asking, I bought my just simple regular TV that can only be seen in the US. So I asked him, I said, why you bought a system TV? He said, listen, the system here is not the same as system back home. And when I'm leaving, I'm taking my TV. 25 years ago, he's still here. I mean, he spent $500 more than he spent. So because, you see, little stuff like that, when you like, okay, yes, we want to think about back home, but you can't, what are you bringing back home, really? Unless you have a strength you need here, you can carry your weight here. If you cannot carry your weight here, what made you think that you can carry your weight back there? You have to be able to carry your weight here. And even if you carry your weight here, you have to be able to have the extra weight to be the extra place to carry other people's weight. Because you're already here, you're carrying their weight back home. So when you go over, you go back home, it'll be kind of harder to do. So you have to really integrate it. That's, I think, usually when I come and they ask me, how can you serve your country? How can you serve your people? How can you serve Africa? I say integrate here, serve yourself well, integrate in this community first, and then you can bring the resources from this community and take it back over there. So basically, also, communication plays a very important role in integration. I mean, with regard to giving back or with regard to helping the continent develop. Communication is important because you may be talking about something different and they may be talking about, I've seen people, for example, when they're trying to communicate with the government, they're like, okay, fine. We want to, let us say, take an example. I wanted to bring a trade mission to the continent. Fine, good. The ministry or the government say, we're going to send the ticket. Yeah, great. They will send the ticket, and they probably will send the ticket. But you never know when, until the day the ticket come. One day, nobody told you that the ticket was coming, and you have to get on a plane the next day. So communication is very important because you did not, people did not really see eye to eye, communicate to what the timing is, because, we know in Africa the time is expensive. And as long as we commit to something, the timeline is not that much important. So there is, which creates some sort of disconnect. I wanted to touch on this morning on those little issues, just to say that basically that we as a diaspora, we have a lot to bring back to the continent. And we have also to recognize that it is important that when we engage with the continent, we engage on the basis of, okay, we have a self-worth, we want to bring something, and no matter how hard it can, we have to bring it. Because the goal is not the relationship really you build with the people. The goal, from my point of view, the goal is what you bring to the people, what you bring to develop, to lift the continent. One of the person who spoke earlier, he talked about Ebola. And we, like he said, we now talking about people, why is now the U.S. is engaging in Ebola. But why we in African, since, what is that, 1970? That Ebola is around, we didn't engage in Ebola. I mean, same thing for malaria. I was at the Gates Foundation earlier when I got back here, and I had to say thank you for the Gates Foundation. Why? Because malaria has been in Africa ever since I've known, I can tell. But nobody is engaging to find a vaccine for malaria. However, now, because of the Gates Foundation engagement in Africa, they're looking into a vaccine. I'm like, we have scientists. We have the wealth. So why are we not doing it for ourselves? Evidently, we as a diaspora need to bring that light to to the table. Because when you are in a contest, when I ask myself those questions, I start to think about it more than just the blaming, going beyond the blaming game. Take my own example. Okay, fine. Yeah, maybe when you live in something or you are under some sort of threat, you probably cannot think widely. And then you probably like, okay, you just want to make that threat go away. That's probably the case in case of malaria and other disease. People just want to fight those things and live another day. So we, from that part of the world who are outside the war, we need to extend the thought to them by thinking sometime with them, because we don't have the same pressure that they do have. So we have more leeway to be able to think through the process versus they are inside and what they're doing, they're just trying to resolve the issue to live another day. So it is important that we look at things of that nature. As you can see, I've been talking as somebody from the diaspora, basically, although I represent a country which is the Republic of Benin. I have that, that's what I was saying you earlier, I have that duality in me, basically, which is not really a conflict for me. It's definitely, I know that this is where, this is where I would think I've learned a lot of what I needed to know as an adult, and this is probably, and to serve my country, I choose to serve my country from this place where I am. So basically, I'm not going to talk too long. I just took things here and there because I was not quite sure the audience I'll be talking to, but I wanted to share that experience with you. And basically, like Mel said, yes, I've been on a hill. I've been, in a business, and I've been even in the diplomatic corps in so many ways. But I thought that the best way to serve it doesn't matter where I serve the country, because I told my president when he appointed me, I said, you know what, even if you didn't appoint me, I'll still serve. I'll be still serving the country in so many ways. So that's the only thing I wanted to share with you guys this morning. And once again, thank you, Janet, for inviting me. Thank you, Mel, who always have been a friend. And effectively, yes, when I got the call, I called him because I'm like, you know, how am I going to come back here and tell my brothers and sisters here that now I'm the ambassador, they can't talk to me anymore, anyhow. So you have to, and you go, when you want that work to be done, you go to me, you tell your people that now I'm the ambassador, they can't just be running to me anyhow. So basically that, I called Mel, and he was able to, to be a friend, or remain a friend. And thank you, Janet, and thank you, everyone.
A lot of that at the World Bank, you know. To do something is another discussion, but to think about it, they're very good at it. Our first speaker, our tone setter, is Professor Nikos Passos from the Northeastern University up in Boston University. I read his bio, he sent it to me earlier, and I just got through reading it again. It is absolutely astounding. Sometimes I look at people and say, how do they do all this in one lifetime? And he's not even an old guy. But he's a professor of criminology and criminal justice at Northeastern University, co-director of the Institute for Security and Public Policy. He's a law professor at Case Western Reserve University, a program consortium, a member and faculty at the International Anti-Corruption Academy in Vienna. Has just done some of everything in the way of policy. So one of the things I find out that's really unique about this conference is that the quality of a participant is absolutely superb. Not only the quality of the participant, but the quality of the audience. And so it really comes across as a true learning experience. So without further ado, I'd like to pass this to Dr. Nikos Passos, who's going to set the tone for this conversation.
Things that I do is actually I'm chairing the advisory board for the African Center for Anti-Corruption, Integrity and Accountability. It's a Uganda-based initiative with ambition to be a Pan-African program for education, training, and policy involvement, research, and sustainable reforms in Africa. I'll be very happy to discuss more about this shortly. There is a PowerPoint presentation that I hope that we're going to get up and running in a minute, but I would like to get straight to the point of the topic I want to talk about, and that is remittances and flows in and out of Africa. The big problem that we have is essentially that there is very low competition, very few options for remittances to Africa. That's problem number one. Two, the cost of remittances is unacceptably high. It is well above the average in the world. We're talking about, in the average, 12.5% of remittances. Today, with the technology and the means that we have in the international community, it is totally unacceptable that people who send their money to Africa have to pay 12.5% for the money that goes to their families. And thirdly, part of the problem is that, and I'm sure you're familiar with that, more money goes out of Africa than in. When you look at illicit flows, they overwhelm the amount of money that goes into Africa. So we are draining. It is the equivalent of redlining that we used to have as a problem here, where more money goes out of poor communities than in, and banks that operate there essentially take the savings of people and invest in richer communities. This is what is happening in Africa on a systematic, grand scale right now. Are we going to have this, so the question is whether, in fact, we can do something about it. And a key answer to this problem is financial controls. Anti-money laundering, terrorism finance, sanctions, whatever it is, they're financial controls that also assist with anti-corruption, monitoring politically exposed people, and also tracing and repatriating assets that have been stolen from the country, or bribes and corruption that have been paid overseas. Without a proper financial control system, it doesn't work. So it is essential that we have those kinds of regulatory arrangements at the national and international level to address these things. However, the question is, do they serve the purpose? Do they succeed? And to what extent we have externalities whereby, instead of actually productive consequences, we have negative effects and problems. Let me just take my laptop so that I can take my notes. Externalities or not, you have to see what kind of challenges we're facing for implementing those kinds of controls. The first problem we have, not only in Africa, but in Africa as well, is the absence of political will to actually implement them effectively. In most of the world, including Africa, what we have is actually a process whereby we go through the motions, do the necessary, pass a law, introduce an institution, so that we do have, there we go. Okay, so here are the challenges. The first one, no genuine commitment in order to actually make the necessary reforms and implement them. I'm talking about genuine political will, not just have a law or an institution that doesn't get implemented or doesn't do anything. Secondly, the problem of low capacity. We're talking about human capital as well as physical capital and resources and skills that are necessary for implementing them. In order to do the financial controls properly, it's actually a very complex business. And it takes multiple ministries, government agencies, and collaboration between the private and the public sector. These parts, essential parts of a financial control system, need to be coordinated. When one of these pieces is missing, the whole thing falls down. And that's part of the problem, that in many countries with low capacity, this kind of comprehensive and complex system is simply not in place. For this reason, we need technical assistance and support from outside. Here's where the donors and international organizations come in. What problems do we have there? that effort is neither coordinated, nor is there a proper quality control to see that things are done in synergistic ways, so we do not waste resources, and they're done well, so that whatever is done and whatever is put in place is actually something sustainable and effective. All this leads to disparities between what is the right thing to do and what is the legal thing to do. Disparities between legitimacy and legality. We have externally introduced laws and practices that may contradict local culture and business practices. And we need to address that, because whenever doing the right thing and doing the legal thing are at loggerheads, we will never have sustainability. The cost of compliance is too high and small companies cannot meet it. And then we have corruption and governance challenges that make, the private sector not produce, not collaborate, not give the assistance to the state, to the government agencies to investigate, prosecute, sanction, repatriate assets, and so on. But we also have problems within government agencies. When they receive the reports, they sit on their hands and they do nothing about it. So these are the challenges. And what is the effect that we have seen? The cost has gone up and gets passed on to consumers and labor remittances. So the small companies are taken out. That reduces competition. Okay? And when we have limited competition, the big players essentially decide who is going to be served and who is not. And there are many regions, many parts of Africa where we do not have any remittance services at all. The target from the G20 is to bring the cost of remittances globally down to 5%. In my view, that is too high. When you look at informal remitters in South Asia, do you know what the cost is? 0.1%. And a better exchange rate than you will get from the bank. That's the real cost of remitting money. And informality, informal remitters sometimes are a better solution than banks that take advantage of their customers and the monopolistic position that they find themselves in. But the effects of all this is that humanitarian aid are also affected. Aid doesn't get where it needs to go. And you have charities and others who have been targeted. This is part of some financial controls in other countries, like the United States, like Europe, elsewhere. You have charitable organizations, because some tiny proportion of money might have ended in the wrong hands. Entire organizations have been wiped out. That's no way of doing assistance and integrating efforts to fight serious crime in Africa. As a result, efforts to actually get the remittances where they need to go, you have a lot of players that go underground. They are not being monitored. We do not have any traceability or transparency there. And more money actually is more likely to end up in the wrong hands. That is not necessary, but it is one of the externalities of this. And the effect of all this is also that ethnic communities do not trust governments where they reside. They do not collaborate. There is no community policing for those kind of efforts. And anti-globalization, anti-capitalism kind of sentiment grows in places where you actually need to invest and promote democratization, markets, and so on. So multiple negative effects we have here. And it is not just anti-money laundering and financial controls against crime that cause problems. What we have is, and here is a typically African problem, okay? What we have is foreign currency conversion rates that are absolutely extraordinary. There is no reason for those sorts of things to happen. In Kenya, for example, there's an 8% charge that gets added for people, the lifting fee, they call it, when somebody goes, picks it up. That ends up costing the beneficiary 16%. This is a tax. This is a punishment. This is theft, if you ask me. It's unacceptable, all right? Then we have exclusivity agreements between money service operators, their agents, and banks. That reduces competition and drives up the costs. Then we have a lot of financial regulations, a number of governments in Africa that favor banks over other alternatives. There are parts of Africa where 90% of the people do not have a bank account. How can they get their money if they are financially excluded, if they are unbanked? So that excludes additional people, that drives up the cost, that pisses people off, that turns people underground, therefore we have even more crime. It's a vicious circle that needs to be reversed, okay? So here, and the problem is being recognized. Here is a finding from the Central Bank of Nigeria. Exclusivity clauses, they tell us, are aimed at protecting the interest of international money transfer operators. Restraint of competition, unnecessary transfer costs. This is the Bank of Nigeria recognizing that 5 years ago, 6 years ago. From Gambia, exclusivity clauses constitute an abuse of the dominant position enjoyed by two dominant remittance companies. So it's not like I'm telling you something new. We know it. I'm just putting things together here, right? So if we recognize this, those externalities need to be eliminated. They are unnecessary cost to innocent and needy victims, right? Now, if we have this target of 5%, which I think is too modest, it has to be lower, right? But if we had this for Africa, that would mean $1.8 billion annually becoming available for things that you can do in Africa. And what that means, here is the human cost of this excess in charges, okay? 14 million students, primary school kids can go to school, right? Or 8 million people will get better sanitation, or 21 million Africans will get clean water. They are the victims of this theft, all right? So, and when you look at, some corridors within Africa, it's not only coming from rich countries, you look also at what charges for remittances within Africa are, and you can see South Africa to Mozambique, Nigeria to Ghana, more than 20%. For God's sake, why? Right? So, what does that diaspora need to do? The first thing to do is establish the facts. We need to have an evidence-based dialogue. We gotta get the facts right, okay? Where is market concentration? What commercial prices inflate charges? We need to establish and point that out. A problem is a problem when it is constructed as such. We need to talk about it, right? Secondly, advocate for transparency on currency rates. You know, there are people who do have a problem with financial literacy. You do not expect the recipients to come up and revolt against this. It is people who understand this that need to actually do something about it. So it is incumbent on us to do this. Raise awareness in both sending and receiving countries and help get rid of these exclusionary arrangements, right? Then put remittances at the center of the development agenda, because remittances are the most reliable, consistent source of foreign investment going into developing countries. And actively seek and support all kinds of initiatives. We have new technologies. Let's look at alternative ways of getting the social or financial remittances to the receiving countries. There are all kinds of new technology, from mobile telephones to Bitcoin, that are being explored, that are used with transparency, with traceability, with extremely low cost. What we need to do, by the way, does anyone know what the literal meaning of diaspora is? It's a Greek word, so you may not know it. What does diaspora actually mean? It comes from the verb diaspiro, and it means to scatter, to fragment. What diaspora needs to do is actually fight against its own definition. We need to reunite, reintegrate, harmonize, come together, bring together the Africans from outside with the Africans on inside. Okay, so I am diaspora, and I know it, I experience it. We have to do this with all our respective home countries, right? So, in addition to that, how do you translate that in addition to the tasks that I mentioned earlier? These are broad strategic. I mean, we have to think strategically. There are so many missing parts and there's so many moving parts that unless we get things organized in a systematic, evidence-based, knowledge-based way, we're gonna be draining holes in the water. No sustainability, okay? So, risk and capacity assessment. What are the problems? What is the existing capacity? That gives you clues as to what the needs are. Then we need a strategy in an inclusive way where civil society, private sector, NGOs, academia, media come together with governments to figure out what are the priorities and how we set them. And we set them for 5, 10, 15 years. In most countries, it's a multi-generational problem. But we need to have immediate results, immediate projects, small steps. These small steps have got to be instrumental to achieving the longer-term goals. That is what the strategy does. Brings consistency, brings instrumentality into the picture. So, the other big principle that I want you to take away is we build on what is there already. Sometimes we waste valuable resources that are in place. Sometimes informal justice, for example, is much better than rule of law that gets imported from another country and brings in concepts and practices that are foreign to the country and therefore no local buy-in. Use what you've got. Use what you've got with respect to Hawala. The informal remittances that we have in South Asia as well as in many parts of Africa is that they know their customer better than big banks know theirs. There is no transparency in the sense that you push a button and you get an answer on who's the sender and who's the recipient. But if you ask the right question to the right people, Hawala operators know exactly who the immediate counterparty is, so you can follow actually the money. Whenever they work together with the authorities, we have good results. In India, they solved the Mumbai bombings and the attacks on the Indian parliament because a Hawala operator gave them information. In Dubai, they solved the drug money laundering operation because of collaboration with Hawaladars. So when you do the right thing with respect to informal remitters, you can accomplish a lot more. It's a challenge, but it's an asset as well. So need to take advantage of that. Manage expectations means that we've got to not overpromise things and then disappoint. The way to build legitimacy and credibility is you have the small steps and you deliver. You've got to deliver. That is what gives you the positive momentum that you need when everybody then continues gathering together, right? Explore the alternatives to both bank and Hawala options. Make sure that donors think a little bit also about the long term. Very often, donors are missing the long term and the important for the immediate and the urgent. They can be excused because, yes, there is Ebola, there are all kinds of disasters and problems, they need to respond. But what we miss is how do we get whatever change is put in place to have a lasting effect, to continue. This continuity need requires longer-term thinking. So encouraging the donors to think long-term as well as the short-term disaster responses is imperative. And finally, we need to have some awareness of where are we? Are we making progress? Are we falling behind or stagnant in some areas? Performance indicators of benchmarks are important for self-assessment as well as external accountability. And then as we see how the reforms and changes we implement take shape and produce effects, we make adjustments going on. We put all this together, we have a recipe for success. Thank you very much indeed.
Is good governance, you know. I don't know who I'm playing. And then I want you to take a few questions from the audience.
Oh, sir.
striking me, sir. My name is Ray Brathwaite. I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. From Trinidad and Tobago. What is striking me is that I'll use this anecdote. Recently, there was a plane crash in Central Africa. And in a week, France was present. All the writings, all the readings, France is still controlling Central Africa and most of Africa with respect to the central bank and those places. When you have giants like France there, how can the diaspora make that difference? How can the diaspora push for the changes in the central banks when the central banks seem to be controlled by big players? It bothers me. So I hear all that you have said, and it is theoretically correct. But in terms of the practicality of it, it is where the source of power lies.
Right.
And how do we alter that to
There is no doubt that what we're talking about here is a challenge. This is why I said that this is a multi-generational fact. Okay? Will be part of the strategy is to find out where are the alliances and where are the resistance. There are resistance. There are problems. But unless we start bit by bit to make a change, it won't happen. Okay? How do we make a difference? I know that the problem with central banks, I have experienced it myself. Taking measures that kill the real economy. Right? There's negative growth for 5 consecutive years. Right? So you do have these things, but how are you going to present a counter-argument, an articulated discourse? You need to have the facts. You need to get to establish the phenomenon. You need that knowledge. Without that knowledge, you cannot have an antilogue. You cannot have a debate, right? So that's the first step. Secondly, you have to have, as I said, it's a multi-stakeholder issue. Diaspora has a role to play. There are means, there is human capital. Politicians in the countries where the diaspora live listen, okay? They do listen, and so do aid agencies like DFID, NORAD, USAID, and so on. There are many parts in countries that have this controlling power where the heart's in the right place. Use it. That's part of the strategy. DFID, for example, and UNDP have been helping the Somali community when we had the Barakat disaster after 9/11. They are helping now with Daabshil and the other Somali remitters getting back accounts and getting things going. So there are examples of constructive collaboration. Let's learn from those and let's make those steps and let's do little by little. It's not going to change overnight. No one is going to, revolution is not going to happen.
So go back to your first point, sir. Your very first point. The diaspora has to help with the political will.
Both at home and in the country where they reside. Right. Yeah, that is part of, that's part, right.